I don't think there's any need for introductions. I think we all have spoken to each other before. However, there will be people observing, so it may be worth just doing it to ensure that everybody's aware of who we all are. My name's Yvonne Wright. I've got my colleague here, Mr. Mike Warden.
Good morning.
Thank you. Can I move over to the council, please, to just give
Yes.
introductions?
Good morning, ma'am. My name is Paul Shadowrevian QC, acting for the council.
Thank you.
Good morning, Inspectors. Jonathan Quilter, Strategic Planning Manager at Brentwood Council.
To ensure that everybody's aware of who we all are. My name's Yvonne Wright. I've got my colleague here, Mr. Mike Warden. Thank you.
Good morning, Inspectors. Andrea Pearson, Senior Planning Policy Officer.
Can I move over to the council, please, to just give introductions?
Good morning, Inspectors. Kay Polaris.
Good morning, ma'am. My name is...
Great. Thank you very much. Now, the purpose of this session is to go through a number of outstanding matters in relation to some of the documentation
QC, acting for the council.
The council has produced, and in response to some of the matters that we've heard in the hearing sessions. And also,
good morning, Inspectors. Jonathan Quilter, Strategic Planning Manager.
So I think a good one to start on. So though it may jump around a little bit, and it's not necessarily sort of in plan order, but we are anticipating that this is not necessarily a lengthy discussion, but what I may anticipate is that my colleague and I may need some breaks just so that we can have a discussion as we go along. So there could be several breaks, and I think that's going to be quite useful because we've got plenty of time. So if necessary, we'll just do that. Okay, just to let you be aware. So first of all, I'd like to start with the revised framework, which obviously came out this month. And the council, you've produced a list at our request of where you think there may be an impact on the wording in the plan. And I'd just like to go through that with you, first of all, so that we can understand what you've pulled out as potentially needs to be amended, whether it's of any significance or whether it really is just a factual update to ensure consistency with, well, all of it is to ensure consistency with national policy, but whether there is a significant change that impacts on any policies within the plan. So I don't know who from the council would like to take me through the document that you've sent through.
I'm going to ask Tom Hang to deal with it because it's her document.
Yeah.
She went through the MPPF. I've seen it too, and I'm aware of its content, so I will assist where and when necessary.
Great, lovely, thank you.
Let me get the document, Inspector, and then
that's fine.
The only thing I think that was missing in that document was paragraph 96, the new paragraph 96. That was a new paragraph in the NPPF that wasn't introduced in the consultation back in March. So I can amend it that. But regardless, so I went through all the NPPF paragraphs that was either updated or added in July 2021. And most of the modifications does not have a significant impact on the plan, local plan policies. The potential, there were a few potentials wordings that may or may not need to be added in the plan. For example, there is a more emphasis in the NPF in terms of creating beautiful places, and we've seen a lot of references to the term beautiful in the new version, and I wonder that would have an impact on our policy B13, sorry, HB 13, relating to creating successful places, whether we need to use the term beautiful or attractive, or the two can be used interchangeably. The other area that may need to be that needs to be updated is in terms of the requirements to reference to the National Design Guide and the National Model Design Code in terms of designing of the streets and parking areas and other transport elements. And this is the new paragraph 110C, which is previously paragraph 108. But this is a new subcriterion that was not previously in paragraph 108. So, which is why I think that we should add some additional wordings to that effect in paragraph 5.118 in the submission local plan. Another potential amendment is regarding paragraph 131 in the NPPF, which now sets out that streets are or should be tree-lined, and that applicants should also provide long-term maintenance of the new planted trees, and that should be reflected in the strategic policy HB 13. So that is another potential modification.
Well, let's just backtrack and go through the ones that you've highlighted. Okay. Obviously, this is national policy, and in any event would be a material consideration in dealing with any application that would come forward, whether it's in the plan or not. So all we're interested in really is whether there is any necessary amendments that would be required for soundness to ensure consistency with national policy. So you've quite rightly have only highlighted a very small number that you feel would require potentially some form of amendment. Where it's an amendment to supporting text, if it's not changing a policy and the meaning and the reading of the policy, because in reading the policy you would need to read the National Planning Policy Framework anyway, because that forms part of not form part of the development plan, but it's a very important material consideration. As you're changing these policies that you're highlighting anyway, I don't see any reason why you can't add some additional wording in there. Some of these may well just be AMs rather than necessary as a main modification, but we made the point at the beginning that if you're already making a main modification to a policy anyway, you might as well put the AMs in, because it's just easier then for people to read. So I'm just reading your strategic policy one that we've just gone through on the trees. Okay.
So in summary, Inspector, I think the two modifications, two policies that are mainly affected are HB 13 and NEO 6. The rest, as you say, are really minor changes that can go into the AM or supporting texts. And even when it's additional text to the policies, actually, it's just helped to align with the NPPF, but it's not necessarily change the soundness of the policy.
Okay, it's it's an update because it's a necessary update because it's national policy.
Yeah. Rather
than it's changing the context of the policy. That's what I'm hearing. Okay.
Yeah. Essentially, we've not had to revise the policy approach to accommodate changes which have been made.
Okay.
And so these changes can be made to the policies to bring it strictly in line with the new MPPF. And tree-lined streets is a prime example of that.
There is emphasis on beautiful places, but in the plan we use the term attractive places, and in my opinion that the two terms can be used interchangeably, and it not necessarily that we need to replace attractive with beautiful, but I will leave that decision up to you.
That's something we can consider. I don't necessarily like just the repetition of there has to be consistency with national policy, but it doesn't have to absolutely repeat national policy. The framework makes that very clear, that the purpose of a local plan is not to repeat national policy, because that's already there. So I don't necessarily see that being an issue of whether a wording is necessary, that it has to be exactly as set out in national policy, when it very much can mean the same, such as attractive and beautiful. There can be arguments around the semantics of different meanings of the words, but we won't go down that route for the purposes of a local plan. What I wanted to, I'm just wondering whether there is there anything from the changes sort of in relation to design or anything like that that may have an implication for some of the site allocation policies, particularly the strategic policies? Is there anything, have you looked at that?
Yes, ma'am. I've looked through the national policies, the paragraph, and also like our local plan policies, as well as especially the site allocation policies. But my observation is that it will not have an impact on our plan policies, because the council has placed a significant importance to the design and quality of placemaking, and we would like to make sure that development would also head to that direction. And so the policy was drafted to that effect. So and it seems that the national guidelines, we're moving in the same direction with the national guidelines.
Okay, we might come on to that as we go through, because obviously we've got a list of things that we want to discuss, so we may well come back to a few of those points. So sorry, I'm just looking at the NEO 6 one. Okay. Okay, let's move on, but we may return back to if we think that anything is relevant as we start to discuss some of the outstanding issues. So I think we'll just move on for now, and then see if there is anything that comes out of that. And apologies that we haven't been able to give you sort of an agenda of the topics. So obviously you just don't know what's coming up. So I do apologise for that. It's just that it's a bit of a moving feast. So we weren't quite sure, and we didn't really want to do an agenda until we'd finished the sessions yesterday as to then what would actually be on our list. So just bear with us. But as I said, if you need time to either find documents or to discuss things amongst yourselves, then we will just have a break. Okay, and we'll do that throughout this morning if necessary. The next one I want to move on to then is the settlement hierarchy. And what I want to discuss is not the setting of settlements within the settlement hierarchy. Just in previous sessions, we've asked whether the settlement hierarchy should be within a policy or not. It currently sits within the introductory text of the plan. So I asked the question about what's its status, what's its purpose, and you've given responses back as part of the hearing sessions. But I'm still none the wiser as its purpose and its status. If you want it to be used as part of the planning application process, the development management process, it really needs to be in a policy, because otherwise it has no status. It's not even supporting text to a policy. It's just in it's in chapter 3, I think, isn't it? Chapter 2. Hang on, have a look at the plan.
It's on page 22 of the submitted plan.
Excuse me. Thank you for that. Yes. Yes, it's in the. It's like, well, it's a Borough of Villages chapter, which has no policies, and really and there's no issues with having a chapter like that, but it has no purpose in planning terms, in terms of the plan. You're just setting the scene as to what the borough is like, etc. But there are no policies or anything in there. And to have the settlement hierarchy within that means where there are no policies, it doesn't relate to any policy. I know that obviously the spatial strategy has used it, but it's not, doesn't form a policy. Again, I'd like just council comments on that as to why it's not a policy. Again. And whether there are any issues with you turning that into a policy if you're going to be using it for development management purposes, or potentially using it for development management purposes. Obviously, development management will follow the spatial strategy.
Yeah, I think it's not uncommon, actually, where a district or borough is highly constrained by greenbelt, and where allocations are being made both brownfield and greenbelt to satisfy housing and other development requirements. Unlike a district or borough which is not so constrained, one would need to have regard to the settlement hierarchy in order to make sure that development is proportionate to its location in terms of the availability of services, and having regard also to the character of the settlements themselves. Because any opportunities which may arise will be in the green belt, they will have to be assessed in accordance with green belt policy and the application of very special circumstances. And of course, we're not identifying at this stage any further greenbelt releases than those which have already been identified for the purposes of this draft plan. Conceivably, one cannot, of course, rule out the possibility that applications will come forward on greenbelt, and in those circumstances, the application of the hierarchy would in principle, if it were part of a policy, play a role in guiding consideration as to whether or not a proposal was proportionate to the size of the settlement and appropriate to its character. So it remains, I think, a moot point whether we do need it, but having said that, there is no reason why the settlement hierarchy shouldn't form a policy or be part of a policy that seeks to direct development in accordance with the hierarchy.
I suppose that was going to be my next question. Would it cause an issue for the council? Because that was one of the elements I was going to raise. Obviously, fully aware this is a Greenbelt authority that is obviously restricted by that. But it was that element of, in dealing with Greenbelt, it's the any development that may potentially go forward or come forward for consideration in the Greenbelt, would the use of the settlement hierarchy form part of the other considerations element of the balance of the Greenbelt balance?
And I have to reply to you and say it must be material to any planning decision. So, for example, if a proposal came forward in or adjacent to a settlement for category village, then one would want to know where it stands in the hierarchy with regard to services. And in this settlement hierarchy, it's recorded as being remote and small villages and hamlets with poor public transport, limited shops, jobs and community facilities. So it's possible to frame perhaps a new policy which either incorporates by reference the settlement hierarchy or contains it. I don't think it matters which of those approaches is taken, so long as there's a reference to it in the policy. So as to guide future proposals as they may come forward on unallocated sites.
Okay.
And it can be done very simply with wording such as that it will take into account the availability of services and the character of the settlement in accordance with the settlement hierarchy.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if the council can draft something.
Yes, we can certainly do that, Mark.
As either a new main modification or as part of an existing one where it makes sense.
Yes.
It may not make sense to be other development outside of your spatial strategy doesn't. So I'm thinking it shouldn't really go in your spatial strategy policy because your spatial strategy is very specific as to where growth is occurring.
Yes.
So just have a think about where that should be and just formulate a main modification for that. That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
I'll see to that, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next one on the list, I'm going to jump to, you haven't got this list, obviously, this is just between us inspectors. I'm going to jump to, I'm just letting my other inspector know, I'm going to jump to item 4, Mr. Warden, just because we've just been talking about the Greenbelt and I want to talk a little bit more about the Greenbelt. As part of the discussions on sites that are proposed to be removed from the Greenbelt, we drew the council's attention, and I'm sure you were fully aware of it, but we drew your attention in one of the sessions, which is the session on Greenbelt, to what is now paragraph 142. It was a different paragraph number in the previous version of the framework, which is in relation to plans are required to set out ways in which the impact of removing land from the Greenbelt can be offset through compensatory measures to the environmental quality and accessibility of remaining Greenbelt land. Now, I note that a suggested modification to policy NE9, which I think is set out in your F88 document, excuse me, does make reference 2, can bring it up, is more in reference to what is now 145, paragraph 145, because you've got some similar wording in there. So in any 09 paragraph in your F88 document, under criterion C, you've added some wording that has come out of what is now paragraph 145. But what I wanted to just confirm was this compensatory improvements and this and whether the site allocation policies or the Greenbelt policy, because I can't see it, but please highlight where it is, whether that's highlighted in those policies. Because is it necessary for each of the site allocations, because the vast majority of them are coming, are proposed to come out of the Greenbelt, does there need to be a specific wording in there so that compensatory improvements, I think is the word now that's used, compensatory improvements form part of that development coming forward? Or is council seeing that slightly differently, or is the council thinking, no, we can deal with that a different way? So I'd just like a little bit of a discussion about that, please.
Sorry, my microphone was off. Forgive me.
That's okay. Don't worry.
The essential element of 142 set out ways in which the impact of removing land from Greenbelt can be offset through compensatory improvements to the so these are the key words: environmental quality and accessibility of remaining Greenbelt land. Predicates one, that the council or the applicant has the ability to bring about environmental improvements and accessibility of the remaining Greenbelt land, or that the council has that ability to do that. And of course, much will depend upon ownership. So where it's possible, where an applicant has control over a larger area of Greenbelt, then in those cases it will be possible to negotiate with the developer proposals that may result, for example, in further planting of the Greenbelt, making it an attractive place for people to visit and to give people access to adjoining Greenbelt in that behalf. What the amended NE09 does is retain in paragraph C following. I'll read it out for those who may be listening into this who don't have access to it. It says, the council will seek to enhance the beneficial use of the Greenbelt, to provide or improve access to it, to provide or enhance opportunities for outdoor sport and recreation, to retain and enhance landscapes, etc., etc. And it goes on to say, development proposals in or adjacent to the Greenbelt, including allocations in the plan, will be expected to include measures to achieve these objectives so far as is possible and appropriate. So I think our view is that paragraph C actually does deal with it adequately.
In your view, does the word compensatory need to be put in there to ensure? Yeah. Again, I just want your view.
I take the point you're making here, which is the word compensatory implies, of course, that the development of Greenbelt represents, to put it in broad terms, an environmental deficit, because you're developing what was open land. and my own view concurs with your suggestion that perhaps we ought to include that word compensatory, so as to give developers and others in line with the MPPF a clear indication that what we're looking to do is cure a deficit, and also in line with paragraph C, provide further enhancements. So we could include that word there.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Shadaravian. That's very helpful. If I can move on to its heritage policies now. And just bear with me. Just want to make sure I've got the right document up. Lost my list now. Okay. F97 I'm going to be referring to, which is where your examination note, where you've set out suggested heritage policy amendments. And this is to some of the site allocations, proposing to add text in both the policy and the supporting text about avoiding negative impacts on the significance of specified heritage assets. And where harm, and you're adding wording stating that where harm cannot be avoided, to provide mitigation measures. Now you propose to set that out on a number of residential and, well, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 residential, and then 2 employment proposed allocations, site allocations. The supporting text wording appears to be consistent with national policy, but the policy wording doesn't, because you're putting wording in there about avoiding harm, and where harm can't be avoided, you can mitigate, and that's not in national policy. I realise that you have confirmed or you have discussed these changes with Historic England, but I'm just a little bit concerned about the consistency level. Now, I'm not proposing that we go through all of them, because there's a lot of them today, and you may need to just have a little think about it. But there is a lack of consistency with the wording that you set out in your supporting text. So you make it very clear: development of this site will need to conserve, and where opportunities arise, enhance, and then you talk about the asset. But that's not what you say in the policy. You talk about should avoid negative impacts, instead of actually saying it needs to conserve as a minimum. And then talk about where harm can't be avoided. And that's not what's set out in national policy. So I don't know if you've got any comments on the hoof, or whether that's something you can go away and have a think about. And just because my comment is basically, can you just go and make sure that the policies are consistent with national policy? As I said, your supporting text is consistent.
Yeah, certainly we'll have a look at that.
So it's all the sites that you've highlighted in F97.
Yeah.
The wording in there.
Yeah. So I'll look at 197, paragraph 197 of the MPPF, other relevant paragraphs, to make sure that the policy is consistent. I expect actually that the amended policy was as a result of discussions with Historic England, but I quite agree we need to make sure that it is entirely consistent with the MPPF, so I'll review it on that basis.
Thank you. I can partially understand where Historic England are coming from. They're trying, that's their wording. They want to try and avoid any negative impacts, and absolutely, you know, they are trying to ensure that heritage assets are utilised,
Yeah.
but not to their detriment. But and if there is some detriment, that mitigation measures are provided. However, that's not what national policy says. National policy is very specific. So if you don't mind just having a look at that, and it may be that you do need to just have a discussion with Highways England, just to highlight that, but it would be a short discussion if necessary, just so they're aware that we've raised concerns about the wording. You don't have to agree the wording, because obviously we have to go along with what national policy says.
Yeah, that's understood.
Okay.
That's understood.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, that's it on that. Okay. Mr. Warden, I was going to bring in policy SPO3 because you wanted a discussion on that, didn't you? Do you want to do that now, or do you want to do that later?
Happy to do that now. Go back to policy SPO3.
SPO3 and hot food takeaway.
Yeah. We've talked about this policy a number of times, I think, and we our concern is still I suppose a little bit of lack of understanding as to how the policy would work and the justification for it, and we wonder whether we could just if you could just take us through it, and then we can have a discussion about it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering who's.
It's for
Andrea,
health,
could you?
Yeah, health impact assessment policy, correct? Yeah. SPO3.
Yes.
Yeah. So SPO3 was a policy developed between the council and Essex County Council on their requirement for having a health impact assessment completed for major developments, which we defined in here as being 50 or more. Just to ensure that all possible mitigations were considered in terms of looking at air quality design. And it's supposed to be a desktop exercise that developers go through just to be able to highlight where there may be potential issues and what they can do to mitigate that to help support with their application. I'm not really sure how much more to add beyond that.
The policy is, as you have suggested, refers to, I suppose it's not clear to us still what it is seeking to achieve and whether it is actually feasible. Because it says that, for example, development proposals that are 50 or more units and non-residential developments in excess of 1,000 square metres are required to submit a health and wellbeing impact assessment. Now, we're just not sure how. We're still not sure whether that wording. Well, we don't think that wording is right. That has been suggested, and what we would prefer is to basically strip it down to make it absolutely clear what is required,
Okay.
and why. So it's not because if you look at the hot food takeaway policy, where it refers to suggesting in relation to a school, then I'm not sure that it is totally clear, and we're not clear actually how it would work, and we don't think, as suggested, that would be clear to those owners' proposals for hot food takeaways as to what would actually be required.
Okay. Yeah, I can take a look at that and come up with something that is a bit clearer on that and strip it back to the key points.
Sorry, go on, Mr. Shadrave.
I was just going on to say, I'm leaving my mic on because I'm finding it difficult to switch it on and off, and scrolling between documents, so forgive me.
Just no swearing, Mr. Shadaravian.
No, there won't be any of that, I can assure you.
It's fine.
The issue, I think, putting hot food takeaways to one side, because I understand that it's problematic. I understand that. But looking at the general thrust of SPA3 for the moment, very much depends upon what a health and well-being impact assessment assesses and how it's scored. It has a far wider ranging application than just, of course, hot food takeaways, and so it would relate, one, to whether or not the development provides adequate opportunities for recreation, access to outdoor space, for example, access to health care facilities, and similar things. So I think the point is one of general application, that there is nothing inimical to the plan to have a requirement in the plan that makes the carrying out of the assessment appropriate in relation to the thresholds which are identified there. To make it a requirement that if there is any detriment identified in the assessment process, that it be cured by appropriate changes to the design of the development or the introduction of new elements in the development. So on that basis, it seems that the policy could be stripped down very substantially, and be rephrased in that kind of way.
There seems to be there's two parts of the policy. One requires a planning applications that over a certain threshold to be accompanied by health and wellbeing assessment.
Yeah,
and they would be that would be taken into account in the determination of that application. And then there is the proposal for the hot food takeaways and the 400 meters of a school, and effectively the control of the opening hours.
Yes.
Now, I'm still unclear from the most recent draft version of the policy what is being sought and what the proposer of, say, for example, a hot food takeaway would need to do to satisfy that policy, and why, and does it apply within Brentwood Town Centre or in district shopping centres? I don't think. I know we've discussed this previously, and the latest iteration of a draft is what we're looking at. But I'm still not convinced that it is clear to an applicant as to what would be required and why, or how a proposal will be determined in accordance with that policy.
Yeah. So there are 2 points there, really, if I may. One is whether or not there should be a policy which places restrictions on hot food takeaways as a matter of principle. And the second is, well, if it is necessary, then what criteria is being proposed and what's the evidence base for that criteria? So, for example, proximity to schools, how close, what kind of range are we looking at in terms of placing restrictions, and when should the opening hours be restricted, having regard to the presence of schools? That seems to me the most important aspect of this, so that if someone comes along and wishes, for example, to change the use of a premises near a school, which is compliant in all respects with the development plan, so that there is a presumption in favour, subject to satisfying this criteria, they would have to accept a limitation on opening hours during school term time. That's the essential effect of a workable policy, but it has to be evidence-based. The evidence which is used to support this approach is that which is provided to us by the county, I think I'm correct in saying. Andrea, can you just help me here? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And I just ask, I'm opening up this as a bit of a discussion, I suppose, but Andrea, can you confirm whether or not it has in there distances and data relating to term time?
The distances were suggested by Essex County Council, that was something that they wanted to have kind of across Essex, and something that has been discussed at the Essex Planning Officers Association in regards to the health impact assessment guidance note that was being prepared. And that included information in terms of what they would like to see for term times. We've been told that there are other Essex authorities that have recently had a very similar policy that's gone through examination, that's been accepted for that area, where I can't seem to remember the council at the moment. But I know this is something that the county is trying to have, that all Essex authorities include in their updated local plans. So
I think the point you're making is that the policy is not effective as it's currently worded. Is that right?
As currently suggested, it is not effective.
No.
I don't know whether it is justified, but it is not effective. It is not clear, I think, to me, and I would suggest not clear to the proposer of a hot food takeaway what would need to be done, and why, and does it apply in the town centre or district shopping centres? And I suggest that might be very difficult to apply it to those centres.
Yes, it would.
I don't think it is clear. We have discussed this before, and realised that we're on various we've had various drafts, I think, but this latest draft is still not clear. It's doing two separate things. It's about the submission of health and wellbeing impact assessment, isn't it, in relation to schemes of more than 50 units, and it's also seeking to control proposals for hot food takeaways, and that they be accompanied by health impact assessments, and then the council will, if appropriate, control the operational opening hours of hot food takeaway premises within 400 metres from the entrance points of schools and public health. Now, there are other authorities that have similar policies, and they all vary, but I'm not clear how this one would operate, whether it is justified. But it is not clear, I think it's not clear how it would operate, where it would operate, and why.
Right, okay. I've got those points, and what I'm going to do... Sorry.
Sorry, if I can just come in, because just on the back of what Mr. Warden's just said, I've got the Essex Healthy Places advice note up, which is where this sort of comes from, where the threshold, etc., comes from. I recognise what Miss Pearson has just said as well, that other elements have been discussed as part of meetings. But I'm also a little bit concerned that the criteria isn't the same that's set out in that Essex Healthy Places advice note, which is then referenced in the policy wording, well, in the supporting text, the EPOA guide, as it's called, which is the Essex Healthy Places advice note. Because the wording's different, and no reference is made to hot food takeaways in there, except for a checklist right at the end in Appendix 6.
Okay.
So, and it's a checklist that's required. It's not a health impact assessment for hot food takeaways. So I think there's just a little bit of and if there is evidence that the council thinks actually no, a HIA is required for Brentwood, then obviously we can consider that, but we haven't received that evidence to say that a HIA, and I know we discussed this in previous sessions where the county council said, oh, but it's only a checklist, so it's not going to be onerous. But it's Mr. Warden's questions about, well, okay, well, what's its purpose? What's it trying to achieve? Is it clear? Because it's not. So I would like, because the Essex Healthy Places advice note refers to developments of 1,000 square metres of non-commercial space, which I presume is a typo, because that then would bring in residential if it's non-commercial. So it doesn't make sense what's in the advice note. So I'm just wondering whether there's a consistency issue there as well. So that's why, Mr. Shadaravian, I suppose that's why we just want this stripped right back down to what is it trying to achieve. You've got the health impact assessment, because we haven't got an issue with having health impact assessments policy being in the plan, subject to it being justified. We haven't got an issue with that at all. It's very much, it would be a positive way forward, and something that that shouldn't be an onerous task for developers to come forward on, as long as it's absolutely clear what should be produced and where. But then there's that element of, okay, if the hot food takeaway element is justified, and Mr. Warden has highlighted our concerns about whether it actually is, what right has the council to control operational hours? They might have a right to control opening hours, but why operational hours? Does that may be related to amenity, but or living conditions, but why would you control operational hours? That doesn't make sense. But it also doesn't make sense sitting in the health impact assessment section if a health impact assessment isn't required for hot food takeaways.
Yeah,
Sorry,
understood.
I know we're sort of, I just want to make sure that, because this is going to be our last discussion on this, you'll be pleased to hear. So I just want to make sure that because we are both rather confused still by this policy and what it's trying to achieve.
I've got those points,
Great.
And we'll review it on that basis. We'll strip it out. We will make it a two-part policy, one in relation to health and well-being generally, and the other in relation, if we think it's still appropriate to include it, hot food takeaways. So leave that with us, if you would, please.
Thank you.
Can I just also ask that, I don't know if this is an issue or not, but could you just check consistency with SPO4?
Yes.
As well, please, just to ensure that the requirements are consistent.
Will do.
And then this is a minor thing, or more of a minor thing, because of the movement of the hot food takeaway is suggested to be deleted from PC10, from policy PC10, because that just deals with designated centres. So quite rightly, the council has suggested that deletion, but it's still in the supporting text. So is that just an oversight?
It's an oversight, yeah.
Okay, right. Again, if you can just look at that and just remove that as well, that'd be great.
Yep.
Thank you. Did you have any more questions on that, Mr. Warden?
No, thank you. No.
Okay. Thank you.
I just think that they just go back to, for example, on hot food takeaways. What is it that you are trying to achieve through this policy, and what is the evidence that justifies it? And I think it's become a little bit complicated, and it needs to be, if there is to be a policy, it needs to be very simple, and the evidence that backs it up needs to be very clear.
Very good. Understood.
Shall we move on to the discussions that we've had over the last couple of days on BE11 and BE16 and in relation and infrastructure requirements in proposed site allocations?
Yes, ma'am.
Some further suggested changes have been sent through following the discussions that have occurred. So just bear with me while I pull up the wording.
Yeah. I drafted these yesterday after the hearings in order to help your consideration. I'm not sure that they've actually been posted on the website. No, they haven't yet.
Let me just pull up the right versions. There we go, this one. So, Mr. Shadow-Raven, you said that you have these versions that we have in front of us, which I know aren't on the website yet, but they can be placed on the website.
Yes,
it's not an issue with that, but they can. It was just for the purposes of today and our discussion. Because some comments were made, weren't they, over the last couple of days about potential changes that may be necessary to these policies. Now, obviously, these aren't the original policies as submitted. They're significantly different to those policies that were submitted. And comments were made, I think that the County Council made a comment about that policy BE11 should include should actually specifically state and list all of the key strategic transport infrastructure that's required. And some other comments were made. I think it was Mr. Minot who mentioned about, I don't know if it was in relation to BE11 or BE16, but let me just bring up the policies, the submitted policies, I should say.
I think it was relating to the development near the schools.
It's
and
schools, yes, which is BE11.
Yeah.
So have you taken on board those comments that have been made? Because obviously, sorry, my apologies. We would need, because obviously we try and refer back to the submitted plan document, because if we are to recommend changes, then we have to give reasons for soundness. We have to give soundness reasons as to why elements should not be in there. So I'm wondering why, if we just take Mr. Minot's point, first of all, for instance, about development close to schools and early years, that part, is that because that's covered elsewhere within the plan through a different policy? And therefore it's duplicating, or is it just not relevant in a strategic transport infrastructure policy? I'm just trying to understand what would be our reasoning for wanting to remove that element out of the submitted policy.
If I may address that point, ma'am, in terms of removing just that criteria, it's mainly because it was a duplication with other policies in terms of ensuring the safety and creating attractive public realm and making walking and cycling safe. That sort of thing are covered elsewhere in other policies, which is why we removed it. And the other reason is that because this policy specifically dealt with contributions to strategic transport infrastructure, making sure that those are in place to serve growth that was planned in the borough. So whereas that criteria is more for development management sort of criteria. So that's why it was removed. So those were the two main reasons that it was not in there.
Which makes sense in terms of this is a strategic transport infrastructure policy. That's what we're looking at under BE11. But can you just confirm where elements that are set out within C are covered elsewhere within the plan, just so that I know? So what policy would that be covered under?
Yeah, so the first one comes to mind, I think, is the policy HB13, creating successful places, where it sets out that development should ensure regarding public realm has to be well designed, well connected, and attractive, that sort of thing. And in terms of highway safety, I think it was set out in a policy, but I don't have the reference now, but I can double check and then confirm to you later, if that's okay.
Okay. To be fair, we might have a break very shortly, because I don't really want to sort of, there isn't a rush. Obviously we don't want to be sitting around or whatever, but there isn't a rush to. So I'd rather, if we can get the information now rather than wait, that would be really useful. So probably after this, just going through this, then we'll probably have a bit of a break. And then if you can find the relevant sections, that'd be really helpful to know.
If they're not covered adequately in other sections, then we could certainly include the elements that remain outstanding in a modified BE16.
or is it more of a design issue?
I noted
it's sort of interlinked, isn't it?
There is a design. It certainly doesn't belong in B11 because it addresses design issues. I think the important bit about development close to schools and early years is fine, but that is covered elsewhere in terms of public realm. It's the element that says encourages walking and cycling to address the impacts of school run traffic.
You're right. It's the safety element that would. If you can consider whether that can go into BE16, because that
element, yeah, absolutely.
That part is about mitigating transport impacts of development. So
yes,
that would make more sense, to be fair.
Yeah, I think that's what we should do. But we'll do a check anyway in the break to see where the public realm and design issues are covered.
That should be covered by the other policies.
It should be, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, but yes, if you can check, that would be great.
Yeah, okay.
In relation to the county council's comment, I think they made it yesterday, about the strategic transport infrastructure. Yes, it's in the IDP, etc., but the policy doesn't make it clear as to what strategic infrastructure is required. It doesn't list it. Now, obviously, reference is made to some of the key strategic infrastructure that's required in or has been put forward as a suggested amendment to the policies in the site allocations, where it's relevant to the specific site allocations. And some reference is obviously made in the, I'm looking at the submitted as well as the, to just see if there's anything been either moved or missed off. Do you have any particular thoughts on, having considered what the County Council said yesterday about actually it's unusual to not have a list of key strategic infrastructure actually set out in policy as a requirement? It may be in an IDP, but it's not set out in policy. What's your view on that?
I'm slightly cautious about including reference to individual items in a policy like this, because this could change over time. And if we're talking about the lifetime of the plan, then we have to be aware of the fact that requirements in relation to highways, capacity, safety, etc., is movable over time. I'm very happy to include it in site allocation policies where specific junctions are identified or specific routes are identified which need upgrading, improving, etc. But in context of a strategic policy, the overall requirement should be, as I'm suggesting in the draft, that and it should actually relate not just to allocated development, but all development coming forward. That's my error.
Yeah. We had that, yeah. Mr. Warden had that discussion with you.
That's yesterday. Right, that's my fault. Yep. It's my omission. The requirement to either carry out or provide contributions towards increased capacity and required mitigation measures, which include improvements to the highway network as deemed necessary by transport evidence or as agreed by Highways England and Essex County Council as appropriate and other statutory bodies. So what we're saying is if there is a need to carry out that improvement, that is material and will become a requirement of any proposal.
Thank you. I just wanted your view on that.
That's simply to make sure that B11 doesn't suddenly become out of date.
Yes.
Because there's no reference to a specific junction which may in time need dealing with.
And I can understand that, and it could obviously we'll have a look at this, and I'll have a chat with my colleague over the break as well.
And we're happy to
on
include
that
those
particular point.
but that's our thinking on this at the moment.
Can I just clarify the use of the term increased capacity and the relevance of that term? When does that meet the tests? Because it's about mitigation measures, isn't it, in accordance with the development and the impact of the development on the transport issues, rather than must contribute to increased capacity, because it may not be necessary to increase capacity. So I'm trying to understand the use of that term.
Yeah, perhaps it's best expressed as reasonable and proportionate contributions towards necessary mitigation measures.
Because the mitigation measures for some sites may well be an improvement that would then increase capacity. But it's it's the improvement, it's the mitigation measure of the improvement that is required.
Yeah, it's not the mitigation measure.
Yeah, the increased capacity is a consequence of the improvement rather than it being an actual. Yeah. Okay. Could you have a look at that wording then?
Yes, I will.
Is there anything can you just take us through the BE16, and then we will take a break, and then I will talk to, it gives you a chance to have a talk through on this. So what were the changes that you've made on BE16?
So having regard to the discussion we had yesterday.
This was the likelihood element, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what I've done is just incorporate, and this was at Highways England's suggestion. So I've added the words "and engage in an approach," because again, these are the words put forward by Highways England, and I think they are appropriate, to engage in an appropriate and proportionate assessment process with Highways England, where development has a likelihood, and that's a word I've introduced, to have a material impact on the strategic road network, which is not otherwise, and these are my words, which is not otherwise catered for by programmed works or improvements. So, for example, it may be the case that a proposed development comes forward for, say, 100 houses, so it won't be a large development, but nonetheless, one could predict, because there will be a transport assessment or statement which accompanies the application, which indicates that it will have an impact on a particular junction. Having regard both to the size of the development and the degree of its impact, then the assessment which is carried out, that process which is carried out with Highways England, ought to be both appropriate and proportionate to the size of the development. But that exercise is unnecessary if works are either programmed or planned already, and those planned improvements have the capacity to absorb the impact of the proposed development. In those circumstances, other policies in the plan, in terms of contribution to the contributions policy, would require a contribution towards that infrastructure provision on a proportionate basis. In any event.
Okay, thank you. I think what I'd like to do is have a break. If we can come back, if we can have a 15-minute break. We've still got a number of things that we want to go through, but we still hope to finish this morning. You'll be pleased to hear. But if we do go into this afternoon, then obviously we'll let you know. we'll see how it goes. So if we can have a break and come back at 11, please. So if
Very
you just
good.
want to turn your cameras and microphones off, and then we'll start back again at 11. Thank you.
Thank you.
hopefully everybody is back in the room. Yeah, okay. Ms. Huang.
Thank you, Inspector. Just before we resume, is it okay if I give you the reference to the policy number that I promised earlier?
Yes,
so,
please.
So in terms of the removal of BE11CC, we believe it was covered in BE13 Clause B and policy HB13. With regards to BE13 Clause B, although it does not specifically go into the circumstance of where development are near schools, however, it captures all development and it addresses the safety and design of the streets and basically addresses the safety of all road users. And so, therefore, we believe that it covers that criteria of B11. However, as my colleague Mr. Schroeder said earlier, if it's not adequately covered, we will check with Essex County Council anyway to make sure that everything is covered and that the removal of BE11CC is justified.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's also covered in B14, sustainable passenger transport, B14C.
Okay. Okay, if it's covered by other policies, I don't see it as being an issue then.
Thank you.
So I'll have a look at that. Well, we'll have a look at that. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so can we have a bit of a discussion about maps, plans, site boundaries, etc., etc.? I've got a few elements that I'd like to just run through. So Appendix 2 currently contains the site boundary maps, and we had a discussion about the role of that. What do these maps and the information that's contained there, what purpose do they have in the plan, etc.? What are they? And you've suggested that that appendix is deleted, but the maps are incorporated into part of the supporting text for each of the site allocations. But I am wondering whether then, do those maps then form part of the, are they for illustrative purposes, or do they actually form part of the policies map? And then there's an issue of making sure that there's total consistency. I'm trying to understand what's the purpose of having a map in the plan when it's set out on the policies map.
It's just to aid readers.
So are they illustrative?
They're illustrative.
Okay. If you can make that clear, it can just be in an introductory part of, the start of the plan or something like that.
Yeah, we could actually put.
It doesn't have to be for each policy or whatever, but just make it clear they don't form part of the policies map.
Absolutely, and we can direct the reader's attention to the policies map as well.
Okay. So moving on to the policies map. Obviously, any proposed changes to them do not form part of a main modification because the policies map doesn't form part of the actual development plan. But obviously, it's an integral and very important part of geographically showing what the policies are trying to represent those policies in effect. So need to be accurate and need to ensure that there is a separate proposed changes to the policies map document. So that needs to be produced by the council. and that needs to be consulted on as part of the alongside the main modifications consultation. And there are a number of proposed changes that need to be set out in that document, such as in relation to policy R10, because there is a proposed change to the station car park boundary.
Yes.
That's set out in F108. There's also the removal from the greenbelt of the Gypsy and Traveller sites. That's existing, as well as the proposed allocated. So again, if you can set all that out in this proposed changes to the policies map document, separate document, and let us have a look at that. There may be some others, so if you can just double check everything that's gone through as to, okay, where is there a change to a boundary? And I know we will be giving you some direction on some boundaries in a moment, because I know you're waiting to hear from us on certain site allocations boundaries. So we'll be telling you our thoughts on those in a moment. Just because I've highlighted the element about gypsies and travellers, can you just double check that the gypsy and travellers policies refer to the removal of sites from the greenbelt, and that there is reference to that? Because I don't think it does in the suggested changes. I may be wrong on that, but can you just double check that?
We will.
And provide me with that confirmation, please. If I can move on to a couple of site boundaries where we ask for some additional information. So I'm looking at policy R03, first of all, which is the land north of Shenfield. That's nothing that was raised by representatives, but we raised the issue of, okay, you've got the existing ribbon development that is actually within the allocation. Excuse me a moment. We've looked at your document, which is your F112 document. We don't consider there's a reason to change the boundary of the site, just so that you're aware, subject to ensuring that the policy wording makes reference to there is existing housing there, and therefore elements of the policy just would not relate to that existing development. So as long as something is within the policy, and I think there is some wording in there, but if you can, again, just check that. We're not expecting you to propose a change to the boundary for policy R03, okay? In relation to policy E11, which is the Brentwood Business Park, again, Council, you suggested a boundary change, and you we've been over this several times, and we wanted further reasoning and evidence on exceptional circumstances, etc. And you've produced a couple of documents on that, or the last document was F110. Excuse me again. Apologies for that. Now, you've stated in your documents, and I know that the F110 has set out what you consider the boundary should be, which would mean the release of further land from the greenbelt, and that's to do with what you consider to be mitigation work in conjunction with the development of the site. And that's to do with enhancement landscaping. There's an area that's set out in F110. There's the Worley Street axis, and then there's the A127 link corridor road element that's to the north. We've considered the note. We've considered what we've heard, but we're not convinced as that there are exceptional circumstances to remove further land from the greenbelt. it's not been evidenced. So at this point in time, obviously, we will be going through main modifications, etc. So whatever comes out of that, it could potentially change our minds, although obviously if there isn't a site boundary change, then there can't be any discussion on that. And indeed, I think in the actual policy itself, so when I'm thinking about the actual access elements, where it was stated, well, this must be in there because of the access requirements, the policy itself doesn't make that clear anyway, because it talks about access via M25 junction and or Worley Street. So there isn't an absolute within the policy. And on that basis, we can't, there aren't, at this stage, there aren't exceptional circumstances to change that boundary. Now, obviously, we will set out our reasoning much more in our report, etc. But at this stage, we don't, we're not proposing a change on that. So I don't know if the council have got any comments that they want to add on or make on the site boundaries elements that I've just highlighted. Have you produced a policies map proposed changes document as yet?
We haven't, no.
And how quickly can you produce that? Is that somebody specialist within the council that deals with digital mapping, or?
Yeah, excuse me. But yes, so we can produce that in-house, so that's fine. In terms of, we obviously have the work already worked up to a point in terms of the mapping itself. And just to clarify, obviously, I'm assuming you'd want obviously a written document to accompany that to explain the changes. Obviously, they may not be obvious otherwise in terms of the maybe an obvious question. Apologies.
You may wish to, an easy way to set out existing on the policies map, and then this is what's proposed. That would very clearly set out what the differences are.
Okay.
And then if you want to put a little bit of information as to the reasons why that change is necessary, because obviously that's a council document. As I said, we can't do main modifications on that. No. But obviously we will be looking at it quite closely, because it's a geographical representation of the policies, so it is very important.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. I think in terms of time frames, rough estimate though, Ms. Polaris maybe to elaborate further in terms of the mapping itself, but I don't think that should take too long. A few weeks.
It can be turned around within a week if necessary.
Yeah. So we can work that quickly.
Okay. We're going to be discussing timescales at the end anyway. Yeah. So we'll have a chat about that. What I'd like to do now is move on to residential site capacity for some sites. So we recognise that the site capacities that have been set out in the plan are all, they all have about in front of them. So about 200 houses, about whatever. So that is, we feel, is an appropriate way to ensure there is an element of flexibility, and then the decision will be made at the planning application stage in accordance with the evidence that's put forward there as to exactly what level of development around the figure that's highlighted within the plan can then come forward. So that's not an unusual way of setting figures out. So that's appropriate and is a reasonable approach. However, there are a number of sites, and there's going to be 4 that we're going to be highlighting, where we do consider that the capacities that are set out within the plan don't make effective use of land, which is obviously a key factor, particularly where land is being removed from the greenbelt. It's absolutely essential that if that land is being removed from the greenbelt, that it is effective. So I'm not going to go into all of our reasoning behind what we're going to direct you to do in relation to the specific sites that we're going to highlight, but we do want you to just come forward with main modifications. So it's on the 2 Blackmore sites, which is policies R25 and R26. Those sites need to be increased. The density is very low and is not justified, particularly as the sites would be released from the greenbelt. So take those back up to what was the Reg 19 capacities, which was 40 and 30 respectively for 25 and R25 and R26. Policy R19, which is the Priest Lane site. The submitted plan, which includes the focus changes, puts a density of around, excuse me again, oh dear, I do apologise, puts the density of around 45 dwellings plus the provision of an around 40-bed care home. That's the sort of the wording that's used. Now, the council, you confirmed in your F78 document that the care home provision is no longer to be required on that site, and therefore you're proposing to delete that from the allocation. But you also state in that document that the housing numbers, you don't feel that the housing numbers should go up, should not be altered for the site, even though an element, a 40-bed care home, would be taken out. Again, I'm not going to go into the specifics, but of now, because that's something for our report and something for us to consider after main mods as well. We consider that at this stage, the lower figure is not justified of 45. So it should go back up to the Reg 19 capacity, which was 75. So if you can set that out in a main modification, please. That's all I've got on site capacities. In relation to the housing trajectory and the 5-year housing land supply, and again, I know this hasn't had tax, it was only sent last night to us. I know that the council has now done an updated F81A, which includes completions for 2020, 2021. Can I just confirm that that has also updated the permissions?
Yes, Inspector. So the extant permissions data is also updated. So
that's
in
all
effect,
updated.
Yeah, and so that covers the 5-year period from this current financial year into 2025-26. So effectively been rolled forwards on that basis.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Warden, do you have any questions on the revised F81A at this stage?
No, Mrs. Wright.
Okay. I didn't think you did, but I wanted to give you the opportunity.
Okay.
Just in case. Okay.
Could I just check, not to elongate that, but I think I may have misheard, but did you say there were 4 sites? Have we gone through 3?
Oh, my apologies. Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
I've missed one. You are absolutely correct.
Okay.
Calverton Hatch. Thank you for reminding me. Sorry, I seem to have skipped over. R24. The evidence that we've had shows that the around 30 dwellings on R24 is an exceptionally low density that at this stage isn't justified by the available evidence. So we would like the council to increase the about figure to take account of the density. Now, obviously, this isn't a change that was changed over from the focus changes, etc. But it's so low that it's just not justified in terms of the effectiveness of use of land. So there isn't a figure to sort of go back to, if you get my drift. But what I'd like, if the council can have a look at that and either use, my thoughts are 40 or close to 40, which would then increase the density to what is more effective or is justified. But there isn't an actual, I suppose what I need the council to, I do need the council to just have a look at that.
We can do that.
Because obviously we haven't got, there isn't a figure to go back to that hasn't been consulted on. Obviously this is all, and I'm going to come onto this when we come to the end, this will all be consulted on as part of the main mods anyway, so people can have a chance to have their say on all of this. But the number to go in, if you can give me what you think the number should be, but it needs to be higher than 30 because of the exceptionally low density. But I think around the 40 mark seems to be the most appropriate. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you for that reminder. Now, I would like to now have a chat about the local plan review policy, because we've had a discussion about that over the last couple of days. We've suggested previously in several sessions that it may be necessary to go down the route of an immediate review, and we've had discussions about whether there should be an immediate or an early review, and we've gone through those in previous sessions. So it's not a, it doesn't come as a surprise to anybody that this is something that we would like a main modification put into the schedule for. And that's particularly in light of the Highways England's objections, and also in light of, which only came to light in February, and also in light of the March hearing sessions, where it only then was it confirmed that there was an unmet need. So it's not like these are is something that was considered as part of previous hearing sessions before that, because that was these elements were totally unknown. So obviously in response, we've asked the council to produce a draft local plan review policy, and that has been ongoing. That came about at a previous session, at previous sessions in February and March. So it's not just come about just now. And obviously as part of that, iterations have been, or revised variations have been produced, and one was circulated last Friday, which was mentioned on yesterday and was mentioned on Tuesday. And it was a suggestion, particularly to alleviate some of Highways England's concerns, but obviously it would be necessary at this stage, we feel, because of the issues of unmet need. And the need, because you are a Greenbelt authority, is not simply going out and just finding more sites. You would need to go and do more duty to cooperate, discussions with neighbouring authorities, following the process that's set out in the framework. You would need to undertake further Greenbelt review, etc., etc. So it would be a timely and lengthy process to go down that route, which is why we at this stage are proposing to go down the route of a local plan review policy. Now, the council suggested text you've sent through, and that has included some updated county council comments that came through yesterday or the day before. So what I'd like to do is just go through some of the wording that's set out in that, in the most up-to-date version of that policy. I would like to discuss timescales with the council, because obviously at the moment they're blank. So I'd like to discuss that. Discuss the elements that the county council would like to be included and whether those should or shouldn't be in there, because I know they're in response to some of the comments that they've made in one of their hearing statements. Whether it should also include reference to a Greenbelt review, you being a Greenbelt authority. And also there is the written ministerial statement of May 2021, which refers to first homes. And whilst this plan fits within the transitional arrangements, therefore there is no need to refer to first homes or to reflect the first homes national policy requirement. It does state in the WMS that for transitional local plans, we as inspectors should consider whether a requirement for an early update to the plan should be made to take account of the first homes national policy requirement. So there's a couple of elements there that we just need to discuss really, or we'd like to discuss with you. Obviously, some of those elements have only just been highlighted to you. So I don't know whether it may be more appropriate for us just to have whether you want to discuss that amongst yourselves as a team and have a short break. We're coming to the end of the discussion, so it's not going to be too lengthy now. And we will still finish this morning. So would you like to have a break so that you can think, actually, I hadn't thought about the first homes element, or I hadn't thought about, should we have something about Greenbelt in there? Because I don't really want to just be on the hoof. So would you like a short break to just maybe collect your thoughts? Would that be useful? Or are you happy to just go straight in?
I think we're happy to go straight in.
Okay.
The only caveat I would mention, is my mic on, sorry?
Yes, it is.
Oh, apologies. The only thing I would say is that we would need, I think, to reflect on the timescales, which would depend upon when this plan is adopted, should it be recommended for such, and what that would mean. I mean, we would be hoping to have the submission of the review ready for examination, i.e. at Regulation 19 stage, within 3 years of adoption. So that's what we're thinking.
That's a longer time scale than I was anticipating.
Oh, right, okay.
This would be, and that's what we'd like to discuss. So maybe it's worth discussing first, and then we can discuss, because we have to be realistic, but we also, this is a partial review.
Yeah.
It's not a full plan that we're asking for as part of the policy. So maybe, and we need to be aware that there is a requirement to do a 5-year review anyway. So it has to be way before that. So we were anticipating, or that's what we wanted to discuss, is there a realistic prospect of a partial review within 2 years of adoption? And that would be submission for examination.
Okay.
I'm not expecting an answer now, because you do need to talk about it, think about it, but I would like us to discuss it in this session. Doesn't mean you may not be able to come out with an answer, but it would be useful to have a discussion. But I'm not expecting you to have a discussion on the hoof about that. But that's why we are talking about an immediate review, because by the time then, so you're talking about, or it depends on the nuancing of the wording. It's either within 2 years of adoption, which would then take it to, say you did adopt February next year. okay, hypothetically, let's just go with that, then that would mean submission by February 2024. And then you have to work out how long will the examination take? How long would it then take to get to adoption? But it is a partial review, so it should be a shorter process.
Yes, it's restricted entirely to housing and associated infrastructure.
Yes.
So yes, I understand that. And of course, work doesn't commence only after adoption of the plan, should that occur. It occurs before then as well.
Yes.
So that's taken on board. And it should be, in my view, in order to give it certainty, a period which relates to the submission of the Regulation 19 review, because we don't know how long an examination might take. So
Absolutely, it's about submission.
It's about submission. Yeah,
it's not about when it would become adopted. It would be about submission, because we can't control how long an examination may take.
I think the only unknown element, but it shouldn't take that long, and because most of the work has been done and needs refreshing, we would have to have a call for sites again to see what comes up. We're aware of the existing options that exist. But of course, that would have to be placed into an appropriate spatial strategy having regard to infrastructure requirements. And you're quite right, a further review of the green belt having regard to the available options.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that does need to be included in this policy.
Okay.
So what I'd like is the opportunity, not this morning, but certainly for the council to consider its position so far as logistics are concerned, and the ability to meet that timetable. And I expect you would be wanting something from us to indicate the realism of reaching that target.
Yes. And obviously that's a suggestion from ourselves. It's not an absolute.
No.
If it's more likely that you'll get submission by the end of 2024, for instance, rather than the beginning. So it would be almost it would just be over a 2.5 year sort of element. Then give us an idea. It would be by autumn, but we'd have to try and make it very specific. Because then there is no doubt then as to what the requirement is for Brentwood to achieve in accordance with the policy, which is why this within 2 years of the date of adoption sort of makes it very clear as to what that would be.
That's understood.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So would you like to have a break and just have a think about that to at least give us just an indication? Or is it something, no, we definitely need to go away and think about? We're just wary that we don't want too much time. We haven't got much time available to us to consider sort of, I'll be going through the next steps shortly, but we have quite a bit of annual leave coming up, for instance. So I don't want to be holding things off. I was going to give a very short timescale for responses, as in really early next week is going to be when we need responses on elements that we have discussed today. The digital mapping and the policies mapping is slightly different. That can take a little bit longer, but responses back to for our consideration would be slightly different.
Okay. Now, so far as responding to your requests today are concerned, we will meet a timetable of by the end of next week, if that's what you would like, or earlier.
We were trying to get something by next Tuesday.
That's fine. We'll meet that deadline. That would also
be our preference.
That's fine. We'll reorganise what we have to reorganise in order to meet that deadline. rest assured that's the
appreciate
case. The second thing is, in terms of the, I don't want to just say glibly now, yes, we'll meet whatever deadline for a Regulation 19 submission you may suggest. What I want to do is to take instructions, if I may, and it's from Mr. Drain, who is away at the moment, and come back to you by Tuesday of next week with confirmation or otherwise of that 2-year period.
Does that work? Is he available?
Yes, he will be available
By then. Okay.
by then, absolutely. I just want to make absolutely sure that if we are giving you an assurance that it is based upon a realistic estimation of our ability to provide the necessary services to allow us to complete both consultation and the preparation of the necessary documentation to enable us to get to Regulation 19 within that period.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. What would be useful, and obviously I just wanted to highlight the elements around the timescales for now. What would be useful is an understanding of, you've put forward, just having a look a little bit more detailed on the wording of this local plan review policy. Do you have any comments on the additional wording that the County Council would like added, which is in relation to the local highway net? And I know where these are coming from because these were highlighted in their hearing statements.
Well, the problem is...
Any comments on that?
Yeah, it goes back to the point I was making before about strategic policies. We know there are existing junctions and roads that need dealing with. As part of the review, depending upon what sites are taken forward, other issues may arise which need to be dealt with. So I've taken the view that it's probably better to have paragraph 4 as drafted, which is a review of transport and highways issues to cater for local plan growth throughout the period of the review, in consultation with Highways England and Essex County Council, taking into account those matters which I then itemise. I've made specific reference to strategic junctions which have more than local significance, indeed more than sub-regional significance in some cases. So I think that's appropriate. But you'll see that in 4(2), I've said any additional transport and highways infrastructure that will be needed to meet in full the updated objectively assessed housing needs and existing commitments within the borough, taking into account implemented and committed highway schemes. So that really does bring into play everything. Everything is up for review at that point.
And has the council considered the implications of rolling forward the plan as part of the review? Because obviously there would only be very limited years left when the review occurred.
Yes, we have considered that.
Okay.
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
There'd be no point undertaking a review which only deals with the existing plan period.
No. Well, it depends on the reasoning behind doing that. Mr. Warden, please.
Could I just ask whether you don't have to answer this question, but I'm just interested as to what period of time that the council has been looking as to how far a local plan should be rolled forward. I appreciate you might not want to say, or you might not know, absolutely, but it's just a question in relation to the point you just made, Mr. Shoidavian.
It's something which I'd like to address when I've taken instructions from Mr. Drain, if I may.
Okay.
Again, I don't want to sort of put things into into play without instructions, and it's my responsibility to take instructions. So, but it's something we have been considering, certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. What I'd like to do, and again, is just, I want to take a short 10-minute break, only because I want to just have a discussion with my colleague, and I can't do that online. And then we will, but we're coming to the end. We haven't got much more to do at all. So we will definitely be finishing before lunch. So can I just say that can we come back at can we make it 15 minutes? So it just gives us time to have a proper chat. Come back at 5 to 12, please, and then we'll finish the other elements. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming back so promptly. I just want one clarification, and then we're just going to be moving on to next steps. So there's nothing further that we're going to go through. So just one clarification. On the Council's updated housing trajectory, so F81A, which, as I said, is not on the website yet, but it will be, but it was only sent last night. Can I just confirm, you said that it's updated the completions for 2020-21. Can you just confirm that that is actual monitored completions? So that's not an estimate or anything like that. That is actual.
Yeah,
that's what's been developed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing just to clarify, we haven't yet published that annual monitoring report, but it is ready to be published and we can submit that if needed. So that's not a problem.
Okay, and that sets out then which sites have come forward, etc., etc. Okay.
Yes, there's a schedule of the sites that make up that 5-year supply. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That would be useful to have if it's published imminently.
Yep, we can do that.
It'd be useful to have anyway, the schedule of the completions. You can just pull those out and provide those, because then that gives the evidence that backs up what you're saying in relation to the updated completions. So thank you. And then we can make sure that goes on the website as well. Thank you. Thank you for that. Other than that, unless the Council's got anything they want to comment on, having had a chance to have a chat, I was just going to move on to next steps. So is there anything that the Council wants to say now? I know. No, great. Okay, thank you. I didn't expect there to be, but I wanted to say. So the next steps are that we'd like the Council to produce an updated version of the schedule of potential main modifications, also to produce the policies map changes document. Don't call it modifications or anything like that, because that can confuse things, because it's not a policy requirement. They're not modifications. I would call it a changes document, just so it doesn't confuse anybody who is wanting to make comments on those documents. Now, I think we need to start to work back from main modifications. First of all, what I want to say to everybody, because I know there are a number of people listening in on this conversation, the modifications will be going forward, or the main modifications will be going forward for full public consultation. There will be a, well, I will ask the Council, but there should be a 6-week consultation at least on the main modifications, and I'll be talking to the Council in a minute to just confirm their anticipation in relation to their timescales for that, because that may then work back as to when we need information, etc. So at this stage, the main modifications are would be open to that public consultation, and we would, as the inspectors, we will take on board any comments that are made before making our final recommendations. So these at the moment would be, they're almost potential modifications. They're not the recommended main modifications that we would put into our report or form part of our report. So at this stage, this is the formal process to give everybody a chance to comment on those main modifications. So I just wanted to make that clear. Timescales. When was the Council anticipating going out to main modifications? Do you need Council approval? Do you need committee approval or anything like that?
No, so the original approval allowed us to proceed. So the Director of Planning, Sir Phil Drain, in consultation with the Leader and Chief Executive, can bring forward that document to consultation and without the need to go to full Council, as that's already effectively been agreed. So in terms of the estimates at this stage, I think we're looking, if possible, in September, that we would be able to carry out the main modification consultation. Obviously, we'll need to prepare the accompanying sustainability appraisal, HRA, EQA are the other ones, but that shouldn't take too long. So I think our consultants are already ready to go on that. They have already started that work in terms of looking at what the potential review modifications could be. Obviously, they'll need to see the finalised list, but that shouldn't take them more than 2 to 3 weeks to complete that. But in parallel, we'll be able to get other work ready in time for the consultation to begin in September. And in terms of a specific sort of time frame in September, I think probably mid to late September potentially. That may well be a sort of a time frames that it could be sooner. Apologies for the vagueness on that. Just obviously there's a number of factors there that could impact upon that, just in terms of just trying to get that other work ready in time. And also August as well, because of holidays. But yeah.
Okay, so in relation to that potential timescale,
yeah,
of when would you need to firm up these potential modifications, these main modifications, ready for public consultation? When would you need our comments on those main modifications to ensure that your consultants have the time to get the SA done and the HRA done? And obviously those will be open to consultation as well, those updates.
I mean, obviously dependent on annual leave. I know you mentioned that earlier, but I think if we're able to receive them in, say, 2 weeks, or 2 to 3 weeks, that may assist in terms of being able to get that moving along. But obviously happy to take a view on that in terms of if there's other factors that may mean it needs to be later. But
okay, obviously I will discuss that with my colleague.
Of course.
As to our possibilities. I just wanted to understand from your perspective what it is you need from us to assist the consultants on the SA and the HRA. Obviously, you need to work up the finalised draft version of the main modifications for the purposes of the public consultation, and we then need to look at those to see if we are content with that wording to go through.
Yeah.
So that's what we need as soon as possible to then meet this.
Of course.
For then our comments to come back, taking into account we may have some issues around annual leave.
Of course, yeah. I think
but we'll see if we can work around it somehow. So that comes to the point of that's why I was asking for information on the specifics, on the specific modifications that we've referenced today. We could do with having those by Tuesday, just so that we can then go through that specific wording. If you could add those in, and if there are any other modification, any other changes that need to be made, so that there is an updated version of the main modification schedule. When can you get that to us? Can that be done for Tuesday, because it just includes all of these changes just need to be put into that document? Or do you need to go through the document and need a little bit more time to do that? There is a discussion going on, Ms.
Sorry,
Huang,
just
but,
confirming.
no, that's okay. No, that's fine. It's just that Ms. Huang has put her hand up, so I didn't know whether. Obviously, she's not party to the discussion that you're having with Mr. Shataravian. So,
would you like some time? Would you like some time? Would you like a minute to discuss it?
Yeah. Do you want to discuss it offline? Because you can discuss it offline.
You can take a break for 5-10 minutes.
I just want to ask a question to you, inspectors, in terms of the formatting. I understand that you have some comments in terms of the formatting of the schedule tables.
Yeah.
I hope that it's not
I will send that
significant. Through. Yeah. Okay. If you could do that.
I can go through a couple of things now, actually. To be fair, the main thing is that the MMs need to just be one number. So it shouldn't be MM29 stroke 02 stroke 01 stroke whatever. It should just be just a sequential number throughout. There is potential to merge a lot of or some of the MMs, and there is you've separated everything out, and you've got some additional text that's not in the MMs that almost summarizes what's coming up. Those sorts of elements, I think if you take those out, but what we'll do is if you can send us what you've got so that we've got the updated version, because obviously we're looking at a different version. If you can send us the updated version, then we can go through that and highlight, and then it won't take long for any formatting changes. It's not major. Okay.
Okay, that's understood. Thank you. So far, if it's not, as far as it's not significant or anything, then I think it can be done fairly quickly. But I'm going to hand over to Mr. Kuta to confirm that. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think from the point of view, some may not be Tuesday next week, but probably slightly later next week in terms of just having given time just to consider not necessarily all what's been discussed today, but any other bits we just need to quickly review over just to make sure the consistency on that front. But I think the bulk of the work has been done, obviously, clearly, but we just need a bit more time just to have a few sessions to go through that, if that was okay.
Are you talking Wednesday or Thursday then?
Yeah, I think Thursday probably would be best.
Okay. Okay, that would be good if you can get it to us then by Thursday.
Okay.
To just, if you can give us then, and that that would be the full updated main modification schedule.
Yeah, and if we can do it sooner, clearly we'll provide it sooner. But yeah, we'll
right. Okay.
Yeah, sort of deadline. Yeah.
Okay, because then I can have a chat with my colleague about our timescales, because obviously with other workloads as well as leave, we can work around that. Okay. Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, that's fine then. Thank you. I haven't got, and obviously when the no, that's okay. No, I was just going to say. No, I'll discuss it with my colleague first before we set out any timescales or anything like that. Mr. Warden.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. Just a question, and it's where we started, which was the framework, the revised framework, and the council schedule. I just wanted to be clear, and you might need to look at this in terms of the work that you've got to do between now and early next week, about the Dunton Hills policy, and just to be clear that there is, in your view, no further changes to Dunton Hills policy in respect of design, having regard to the revision to the framework. So if you could, because I don't think Dunton Hills is on your schedule. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you just might want to just look at that and just be absolutely certain that there needs to be no changes.
We will check that and make sure, and we'll do so in relation to each of the strategic allocations.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just again, just on that note, if you can just double check the plan, or certainly it would be the plan actually, because obviously there is reference to paragraph numbers to the old version of the framework, and obviously those would need to be updated to the new version of the framework, because some paragraph numbers have changed, some haven't, but some have. So that may bring in, that's a factual update, so it's not it's an AM issue, or it's just that's just factual. But obviously if there is something in a main modification, then you can update it. That'd be really useful. Thank you. Is there anything further that the council wants to discuss? So this is an outstanding issues element from our perspective, but is there anything else that you feel that you need from us at this stage?
I don't think so, Mel. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for bearing with us this morning. It's been a very useful session, and as I said, the next stage will be the main modifications consultation. We're not going to be having any further consultation or any further evidence other than what we've just highlighted now prior to that, because everybody will have a 6-week window to make comments or relevant comments, and we will take those on board before we make our final recommendations. Okay, so
thank you very much, Mel, for that.
Thank you.
We're also very grateful for your meticulous conduct of the examination hearings to date. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's very nice to hear. So thank you very much. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you. And obviously we haven't got another hearing session scheduled at all. Oh, Ms. Polaris?
So just to clarify, were you looking at a specific date for the planning policies map schedule of changes? We didn't specifically discuss.
Well, you said that could be provided within a week.
That's
something that we just need to check.
Okay.
It's not something that we just need to check that it's correct. It's not. It is in front of us. The policies map is in front of us, but it's not something that we will put into the main modifications or anything like that, because we can't. So again, if that could be provided by Thursday along with the others, that would be really helpful.
Okay.
If you can just let the programme officer know that if there's an issue with that, because I know, I don't know whether your digital person is available to do the work, or whoever is doing the work is available, etc. If you can just keep our programme officer in the know on that. We can't. It's more. I wouldn't say it's more important to sort the main modifications out, but there's more work on the main modifications in terms of our work looking through all of them, the updated schedule, because we haven't got that updated schedule yet. So it will be less work looking through the policies map changes. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, thank you very much. And I just want to say a very big thank you to yourselves for engaging in this process in a positive manner. I would also like to thank everybody else, all representatives, and I know that some people are probably listening in on this. All the representations and all the comments that have been made and have been put to us have been exceptionally useful, and have been very important that we've heard what you've had to say. And on a final note, I'd like to say a great big thank you to Annette Feeney, who has powered her way through organising and, well, not organising the events. I will obviously thank your IT people for actually organising and running this virtual event, because that's not easy when it's one of the first ones that's sort of come along to run that. So I would like to say a big thank you to your IT people for actually running that. But the final thank you to Annette Feeney, who has done a fantastic job for running this session, these sessions.
Here. Thank you.
So, thank you. Obviously, at this stage, we're not anticipating any further hearing sessions. If, for whatever reason, having considered any main modification comments and representations have been put forward, we do have the right to call further sessions if we so desire, but that would be down the route. We need to see what the responses are to the main modifications, and then we will take it from there. Okay, so I will just leave it there. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.